Hello, everyone. Good evening. Hope everyone is well. Got quite a few questions this week, and then quite a few left over from, well, all of them left over from last week. So I will crack straight on. This is one from last week. Hi, I was 48 on Monday and decided to give myself a birthday present of being alcohol free. Friday is my day 5. Obviously, that was last Friday. I was coping really well until my husband simply asked me if I was going to have another dry day yesterday. I felt so cross inside, but asked him nicely if he could stop using words like dry or sober, and that it would be best not to ask me at all, and that I would talk to him if I needed to. I practiced my urge surfing because immediately I just wanted to go out and get a bottle. After 20 minutes or so, I realised that I still blame him, partially but a lot, for my drinking. Intellectually, I realise it has been my choice to drink, but the blame is obviously still there. I wonder how I can begin to take more responsibility rather than blame my husband and past events. Hope this is not a silly question. No, it's not a silly question at all. It's quite a common question. I see it, and I don't want to cast aspersions on your husband or anything, but as I see it, there are a lot of irritating, stupid, idiotic people out there in the world. And you do come across them regularly, unfortunately. But the fact of the matter is, nobody forces you to drink. Nobody makes you drink. It's no one's fault or no one's decision to drink apart from you. Other people can be incredibly insensitive and stupid and irritating, but it's you that decides to react to that by drinking. You can ignore people. You can sit down and talk to people and explain how you're feeling. You can divorce people. You can smash people in the face if you can get away with it. There's lots of ways of reacting to things. You don't have to drink. Okay, so that person may be in the wrong for doing something to offend or upset you. Okay, but it's your decision about whether you take that and use it as an excuse to drink. So I can't really say anything more on it than that, to be honest. So yes, you do need to take responsibility if you're drinking. It's you and you alone that causes you to pick up and drink and have it. As I say, if you've got problems with a partner or a friend or whatever, you talk to them, you ignore them, you leave them, stay away from them, or whatever you can do. Drinking is never going to help. The next question I was a bit confused about. Someone wrote about the below on another group, and I just wondered what your views are on it. And it's I did a very quick look at it. I think it's one of these new supposed substitutes for alcohol. So I don't know much about it, to be honest. I have a kind of an issue with all of these things because I think if you're genuinely serious about sobering up and not drinking, one of the key points is living life on its own terms and not constantly reaching for a chemical substance. And whether that substance is alcohol or an alcohol substitute, I don't think it's a particularly good or healthy way to be living. I would always have concerns about any chemical that you're putting inside yourself to change how you feel. It's probably not a healthy thing. So I would say it's probably not a good idea. But to be honest, I haven't researched it in massive amounts of detail. So I can't say specifically. The next one, I think this again is from last week. I often find it hard to contain my excitement at good news or when something positive happens, and I find it an almost out of control feeling. And that's when I can literally and almost unconsciously put my jacket and sleepwalk to the off license and buy a drink without thinking about it to calm myself down. What's the best course of action to take with this particular type of craving? So I always have a slight issue when people say they do things almost unconsciously. So, for example, if you have a power cut, I can see, because I do it myself, I go into a room when the light's off and I sort of go to turn the light on. I know there's a power cut, but I just instinctively go and turn the light on. And in the same way, the example I always give when you're driving and you're a passenger in a car and the driver's driving too fast or too close to the vehicle in front, your right leg keeps tensing. Now, there's no earthly reason for that when you're a passenger in a car because there's no brake under your right foot, but it's an instinctive reaction. So people do things instinctively and they do it before they've got a chance to catch themselves. But if I'm quite honest, I don't think you can put on a jacket and walk to the off license and buy a drink and come back and drink it all automatically. It just doesn't happen like that. That's not an instinctive reaction at all. That's a conscious decision. Good news or something positive, that's just an association thing, isn't it? We're so used to celebrating. Well, in fact, we do everything with alcohol: celebrate, commiserate. When you're lonely, when you're with company, whatever it is, you end up drinking. But the fact of the matter is that's just an association thing. But don't kid yourself that you're sleepwalking to the off license and buying a drink without thinking about it. There's conscious decisions there. Absolutely there are. As I say, that's not just a knee-jerk reaction. Putting a coat on, walking up to the off license, buying a drink, going back home and drinking it is a fully conscious decision. So I think you need to have a think about how you react to things, and think about why you think taking a drug that would make you feel slightly dulled and uncomfortable is going to help you celebrate something. The next one is relationships. How do you meet anyone sober? I'm probably not the best person to ask about that. I don't know, to be honest. I don't know how you meet anyone at all. But I haven't dated anyone in years. I assume there's ways. I understand there's like websites you can meet people on, dating sites. I assume you can put in your interests and you can say that you're alcohol free. I don't know. So sorry, I've really got much of an answer for that one. The next one is from this week's questions. What do you think about plant medicine for help with addiction problems? So there's a physical side to addictions, but there's a psychological side to it as well. Okay, it really is that simple. And any kind of medicine, be it chemical or plant or otherwise, it can only deal with the chemical side of things, not the psychological side of things. And it's, so it's not something that can change your mindset. And I think it's a lag from the problem that we have, which is almost the start of the problem, which is looking for a pill or drink to kind of cure all our problems. So for me, addiction, a lot of it's about how we perceive the drugs in question. So for example, with alcohol, we believe we need it to have, like a fun night out. We believe we need it to celebrate for Christmas, for holidays, and we struggle to imagine what will it be like going on holiday without alcohol? What will Christmas be like? What will a night out with friends be like? What will I do when I have a bad day at work? And what it comes down to is just a fairly core belief that we need alcohol to cope with or enjoy life. And I don't see that any kind of medicine, chemical, plant or otherwise is going to change that mindset. So I don't think it works. The other thing, of course, it can act as a placebo. And you do hear this a lot from people. I took this and it stopped my craving, which is extraordinary if you think about it, because a craving is a conscious thought process whereby we fantasize about taking our drug. So with alcohol, you sit down and you start thinking about how lovely it would be to have a drink and how miserable you are without it, and how am I going to go the whole rest of my life without a drink? And suddenly you're in this great mental tantrum instead of relaxing and enjoying yourself or doing whatever it is you're supposed to be doing. So sometimes just having something can be enough to stop you fantasizing. It can't do anything physical because it's a conscious thought process. All it can do, as I say, is act as a placebo. I suppose if it acts as a placebo, then all well and good. But if it's a placebo, it's almost proving the point that it's a mental and not a physical problem. Not to say there isn't a physical side with addiction, and you can take things to help with the withdrawal, but it doesn't change the mindset, which is the root of the problem. The next question I'm not really going to be able to answer, I don't think. It's can I ask about illnesses? I seem to be suffering with everything from toothache to neuropathy. Is this to be expected? So my interest in alcohol and addiction is more about how it affects us to become addictive and how it makes us feel and why we keep wanting more of it. I'm not a huge expert in the illnesses it causes so much. I don't know how long you have been off alcohol for, but it's probably going to take a bit of time for you to get back to normal. I would also say that it's possible, because I knew I used to do this, is when you're drinking, you tend to sit around just drinking. And then if you've stopped, you might have thrown yourself into, I'm going to go out, I'm going to exercise, blah, blah, blah. And that might be putting a bit of strain on your body, particularly if you haven't given yourself to get on, a few weeks to get rid of the toxins inside you, and to get on top of things from the alcohol. There's a similar one after this, actually, a second question. I'm suffering from heart flutters every day since giving up alcohol 2 weeks ago. I did drink quite a lot over Christmas. Previous to that, I was drinking a bottle of wine around 3 to 4 days a week. Just wondering whether it's connected. I'm very fit, exercise every day, have a very healthy diet. Again, I don't know about that. That's something you might want to speak to your doctor about if you've got heart flutters. Alcohol usually increases our heart rate, which may sound a bit counterintuitive given that it's a depressant and a sedative. But what happens is, alcohol being a sedative, your body and brain reacts to it by becoming hypersensitive, so it can work under the sedating effects of the alcohol. So when the alcohol wears off, you're left overly sensitized. So as you can imagine, when the alcohol starts to wear off and things start to lift up, that's when your heart rate increases. What some people struggle with is, well, surely that means that when you take the drug in the first place, your heart rate dips. It does, but only very, very tiny amount, because your heart rate has an automatic cutoff. Because although it needs to pump faster on occasion, it never needs to drop below a certain amount. So you have to take a huge amount of drugs to sedate it enough so that it drops to a significant degree. So with drinking, your heart rate tends to go up a fair amount when you're actually in the drinking session, and then it goes off the scale after it when the alcohol starts to wear off. And that's why people find when they wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning, one, they feel hugely wide awake even though they're very tired, and that's the overstimulation. They feel horribly anxious and worried about everything, and that's the upset to the brain chemistry. And the other thing they find is that their heart's beating really fast. And again, that's just the oversensitization. It's the equivalent of having like amphetamines or a load of caffeine. It's just, think of it, alcohol as a sedative, but for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. The other thing from the main impact of that is not that just it's not very pleasant feeling. When your heart rate goes up without exercise, it weakens your heart and makes you unfit, which is why the biggest killer with alcohol is not liver disease, a lot of people believe. It's actually cardiovascular. And that's this amazing thing when people say a glass of wine is good for your heart. It isn't. It speeds your heart rate up. Even one glass of wine, half a glass of wine, it speeds your heart rate up without associated exercise or physical activity, which erodes your fitness and damages your heart. So I would kind of think that after 2 weeks, you should be getting back to normal. And if you are having heart flutters, I would probably be inclined to go and speak to a doctor about it. The next one, I'm sure you've covered the topic before, but what can we do to help out foggy brains in recovery? So what I think you're saying about foggy brains is when you drink when you're drinking regularly and you stop drinking, there's a few physiological processes you need to go through before you start to get back to normal, or start to, a lot of people say, I've stopped drinking, I feel fantastic. And a lot of people who are trying to quit are thinking, well, why don't I feel like that when I quit? And the answer is it takes a bit of time. So firstly, obviously, the obvious one is the alcohol needs to leave your system. So that needs to be processed. So depending on how much alcohol you've drunk, that can be anything up to 24 or even 36 hours. But actually, the alcohol leaving your system isn't the problem. The problems really kick in when the alcohol leaves, but the oversensitization is still there, because that's the alcohol withdrawal. And that's where you go through the period of being unable to sleep. You can't eat properly. You're exhausted, but you still can't sleep. And as I say, it's equivalent as if you just drank a load of caffeine or took amphetamines or something, but without the associated good feeling that you get from amphetamines. So it's you go through that process, and then if you're a binge drinker and you don't drink particularly regularly, when you get through that alcohol withdrawal, you need a night or two of proper quality sleep, and then after that you're back to normal. But if you're a regular drinker, because it can take 36 to 48 hours for your brain to stabilize when the alcohol's worn off, if you're drinking every day, i.e. sort of every 20 hours or so, you're starting your next drinking session, your brain never actually comes out of the oversensitization period. So you're constantly oversensitized, and then you're numbing it of an evening, for example, and then you're going back through it and living through it all day long. So when you finally stop for good, you end up, it's almost like as if you're a heavy coffee drinker, drinking 7 or 8 big mugs of strong black coffee every day, and you suddenly cut it out. Suddenly your brain has no need to be oversensitized, so it goes back to normal, but you're used to being oversensitized. So you go through a few weeks of being really tired and lethargic. So you go from being unable to sleep and really twitched up to almost going the other way. How long that lasts for is a very individual thing. The most I've ever known anyone to go through it was about 5 weeks, but that's a fairly extreme example. But what it is it's basically your brain just readjusting from the years of having a chemical depressant inside it so much. I don't know that there's much you can do about it other than give it time. And people are always very keen to say, eat this food or take this vitamin and blah, blah, blah. A lot of it's not to do with anything like that. It's to do with brain chemistry, and it's to do with your brain getting back to normal. And that just takes time. Some of the things you can do, if you can possibly do it, is start doing a bit of exercise early in the day, because that will help you sleep better, and sleep is always a great healer anyway, and that will help you get back on top of things. Don't forget, if you are feeling very foggy, the other thing exercise does is it releases adrenaline and endorphins and gets the oxygen pumping, so you feel a bit more awake. So if you are feeling very foggy brained, it's probably better, rather than trying to stuff certain foods down your face or vitamins or whatever, is just to go out for a walk and get some fresh air. That would probably do you a lot more good than trying to, somehow come up with some vitamin diet or concoction that you think might help. But unfortunately, it is just time. But as I say, the longest period I've ever encountered on someone has been 5 weeks, and that's a pretty extreme example. Most people are all right after 3 or 4 weeks, maybe. Just read Alcohol Explain 1 and 2. What are you doing to me? I've even recorded trolls on my Sky Planner, haha. Can you please talk a bit about fading effect bias and how to keep the negatives of alcohol strong in the memory? Thanks. So this is quite a common question, because people often stop and they're very happy to have stopped. But of course, over time, fading effect bias kicks in. Fading effect bias, I think most people probably know of it. But it's a universal trait whereby we look back on past events as being much more positive as they were when we lived them. And also there's kind of innate motivators in human beings, one of which I refer to as ambition, which is essentially just wanting to better ourselves and to constantly be reaching for something better, which is itself made up of two things, one being very critical of what we have, and the other thing being fantasizing about what we don't have. So if something's out of reach for you, you start to really, really want it. And if something's very available to you, you start to criticize it. Hence playing hard to get with people. If people think that if they think the person they are after is unattainable, they want them more and more. So with that, there's not really much you can do about it. Just be aware of it. And I think one of the interesting things is, it's funny that people quite often ask this question, because they say, I've gone for 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, and now I'm thinking about how nice it would be to have a drink. I always find it hugely useful just to look in the group at the kind of posts that are going on, because it's interesting that you have group posts from people saying, I've stopped drinking for a few months and now I want to go back to it. And then there's posts from people saying, I'm drinking and I desperately hate it and want to stop, which is really weird, isn't it? Because you've got the people who are drinking who want to be not drinking, and you've got the people who are not drinking that are entertaining going back to drinking, which really highlights the idiocy of the whole thing. But also, I think, really emphasizes the effects of ambition and fading effect bias, and why people quite often just seem to, all addicts, it's not just about alcohol, go from one to the other. They take the drug, they stop for a bit, and then they go back to it, because when they're taking the drug, it's not nice, it's unpleasant, it's a horrible existence. So they stop, but then they start looking at all the good points of it. And because they don't have it, they start fantasizing about how great it was. So they're miserable when they're drinking, and they're miserable when they're not drinking. And they're just kind of going backwards and forwards between the two. The simple way of getting around fading effect bias and ambition is just to see the reality. And as I say, looking at the posts in the group or any alcohol support group, I find phenomenally helpful, because people aren't happy when they're drinking. We tend to think that, because when these thoughts enter your mind, you start to think, yes, I enjoyed it, it was fun, it would be good fun, but it isn't. And if it was, there wouldn't be so many people so desperate to stop. So I think that's something just to bear in mind. Just stick with the reality of it, because it's not a pleasant thing. When you're drinking, you're tired, you're lethargic, because don't forget, when your heart rate goes up, you want to sit down. The faster your heart's going, the more the brain is sending the message to you saying, slow down, stop, your heart's going too fast, which is why drinkers are quite often quite lethargic. They don't have any energy. And of course, the alcohol impacts sleep, because don't forget, with the chemicals that are going on, for the first few hours, you're overly sedated from the alcohol. But when the alcohol wears off, you're then overly sensitized. Okay, so if you look at how that impacts sleep, sleep isn't just about falling unconscious for a few hours. It's about going through different stages of unconsciousness. So there's different sleep cycles, one of which is deep sleep, where you're very deeply asleep. But right up at the other end of the scale, there's REM sleep. Now, REM sleep is a very strange part of sleep. It's where you dream. No one really knows what it's about, but it is crucial. And when they've attached sensors to people and recorded them in REM sleep, their brains light up almost as if they're fully awake. So it's a very strange area of sleep where the person who's undergoing it is almost fully conscious, but not. And that's where dreams happen. So it's a very strange area. We don't know what it's about, but people who are starved of it become very depressed, very lethargic. They've done tests on rats where they've starved them of REM sleep, and the rats have been dead within a few weeks. So it's a very strange but crucial thing. But the thing you need to take away from it, sleep isn't about just going unconscious. It's about falling asleep and then going up and down through different levels of consciousness, from deep sleep right up to REM sleep, where you're nearly awake, and then back down again. Now, when you drink, the first part of the night, you can't get into those higher areas, those higher consciousness, like REM levels of sleep, because you're too heavily sedated. And the second part of the night, you can't sleep at all, or if you can sleep, it's just very fitfully, because you're overstimulated. It's like setting your alarm for 3 a.m. every night and drinking a load of strong black coffee. That's what the impact it has on your sleep. So people who are drinking are tired, they're lethargic, they're miserable, they're depressed, not just from the chemical imbalance, but the impact on sleep. And they hate it, and they want to get rid of, they want to stop. Okay, it's as simple as that. And that's what you need to keep in mind. You can't sit there when you're not drinking and think a drink would be nice, because it isn't nice. Because if you're drinking, you are a drinker. And as we see, all these drinkers, it's not a pleasant existence. Forget whether you think you've got a problem or not got a problem. Even people who have just one or two, it increases their heart rate, which robs them of energy. It ruins their sleep. It interferes with their eating habits. It's just not a pleasant thing. So that's the one thing to bear in mind. Also to bear in mind as well, if you have or perceive yourself to have a problem with alcohol, a lot of the time what you think about is, I've stopped, so now I can go back and moderate. And that kind of, it's a warped logic. It makes sense on one part, because if you cannot drink at all for a few months, logic, or a certain type of logic, would dictate, well, surely then I can just have one or two, because I've managed to stop completely, and it must be easier to have one or two than to stop completely. But actually it doesn't work that way, because there's a few points to say, I think, here on moderation. Firstly, the tipping point between the problem drinker and the so-called normal drinker is that when that alcoholic drink wears off and it leaves that unpleasant, uptight feeling, over the years as a drinker, what you learn is that another alcoholic drink will get rid of that unpleasant feeling. Okay, so if you say, for example, come home from work or turn the laptop off if you're working from home, sit in front of the telly and pour yourself a glass of wine, when that wine has gone, it will wear off, leaving an unpleasant feeling. Okay. If you are a light drinker and have never drunk more than that, that unpleasant feeling will just sit there and you might not even notice it. Okay, but over the years, what you learn is another drink will get rid of that feeling. And when you learn that, you can't unlearn it. So from there on, whenever an alcoholic drink starts to wear off and you get that unpleasant feeling, it will trigger the desire for the next drink. Okay, so that's the first thing to say about moderation. It's inherently difficult because when one drink wears off, it creates the desire for the next one. Okay. The second thing to say about moderation is it's addiction isn't just about the physical, it's also about the psychological. And let's go back to cravings. So as I said about cravings, when you're craving is a psychological conscious thought process whereby you are fantasizing about having a drink. Okay. But the key is here, you're thinking about actually having a drink. If you are not going to have a drink, you don't start fantasizing about it. Okay, so a lot of people will say, when you stop drinking, try and avoid triggers because triggers make you think about having a drink. But for me, it's not about not thinking about drinking. I mean, I haven't drunk now for next month will be 7 years. I think about drinking hundreds of times every day. But I think about it on an abstract level. It's just a topic that interests me. I never entertain the actual reality of having a drink. Okay. And that's the difference. It's difference between just thinking about it in the abstract and then thinking about it as an actual possibility of having that drink. And it's when you think about the actual possibility that the craving starts. So if you know full well you're not going to have a drink, you're not going to be so likely to crave. Now, the problem is if you're moderating and the possibility of having the drink is there, you make the craving all the more likely. So that's the other thing. It's not just the physical with moderation, it's also the psychological. And the final point to say about it is when people think about moderation, they think it will be this perfect thing like when you started where you maybe have one or two and then just don't want another one. It's never like that. The reality of moderation for people that have crossed the line is having a drink, desperately wanting the next one, but resisting it. So even if you can maintain it for any kind of period, it's not a particularly pleasant thing anyway. So it's a very long answer to a very short question. These are all the things you need to have in mind when you think I've got 2-3 months sobriety under my belt and it would be nice to have a drink. It wouldn't be nice to have a drink. It would be horrible. And you'll be right back to where you started. What are your views when people say they get bored when they give up alcohol? It's the most ridiculous thing in the world because boredom is about not having enough to occupy your mind. Okay. Taking a can out of a fridge and opening it and putting it to your lips isn't a massive intellectual feat that will keep you occupied for hours on end. Even if you introduce a bottle of wine and have to get to grips with the concept of opening it with a bottle opener, you'd have to be extraordinarily stupid to find that an interesting and amusing motor action to keep you occupied for hours on end. What they really say when they get bored when they give up alcohol is just they haven't found anything to fill their time. So when you drink alcohol, it's a sedative. So you can basically sit there and watch kids' cartoons or stare at a wall because you're so out of it. You don't really know what's going on. You can talk to complete idiots who you would find extremely boring. But because you've sedated, you essentially what you're doing is stupefying yourself so that the most ridiculous things will interest you, or more accurately, not interest you, but you don't really notice anyway because you're half stupefied. So when you cut out alcohol, you suddenly have a lot of time to fill. And to say you're bored is basically to say that there's nothing on the planet that will interest you. There's no books, no films, no pastimes. It's the most ridiculous thing. What they're really saying is I can't be bothered to find something to occupy my mind, which is their decision. I was also going to ask about feeling bored when doing mundane tasks. I'm finding it more difficult to get motivated to clean the house, iron, cook, etc., without a glass of wine that seems to make it more enjoyable. So this is a slightly different issue. I don't think this is a boredom thing. This is just doing jobs and finding them a bit more interesting and fun. That is, I think, just a very basic thing about alcohol and addiction, is you just need to find your way through the belief that alcohol makes things more fun. It may sound odd, but cleaning the house, ironing, cooking, not so much ironing, but I kind of enjoy cleaning and cooking. But the point with this is you don't enjoy things if you're, one, feeling slightly tense and out of sorts, or two, more importantly, thinking that it would be a lot nicer if you had an alcoholic drink. So remember again what we're talking about with cravings here. If you are doing something enjoyable, like I'm going to sit down and have a takeaway and watch TV, that's enjoyable. Okay, you're sat there, you're relaxing, you're having a nice meal. If you start to think to yourself, I want a drink and I can't have one, and it would make me happy to have one, you're not enjoying the meal. You're not even thinking about the meal. You're not concentrating on what's on TV, because what you're doing is you're suddenly taken up with this kind of unpleasant internal debate. Okay, so then when you have the drink, all it's really doing is removing that craving, it's removing that internal debate, so you can get on with enjoying what you're doing. Mundane tasks are no different. Most people do enjoy mundane tasks. I enjoy things, like simple things. I go running as well, just because it's just doing something and letting your thoughts run. Something physical is usually good. So it's as simple as that. You just need to learn that there's pleasure in these things minus the alcohol. And it really, what it goes back to is believing that you need a drug to cope with and or enjoy life. The next one, hey, William, I'm forever seeing posts from some members saying that they are still struggling despite having read or listened to your books. After asking how they have committed themselves, some say they've just done a light read or even listened while doing the housework, or dangerously, in my view, while driving, thinking it's going to cut it. Surely it's advisable not to listen while driving. I've often suggested, based on my own and others' experience, to commit using their strongest natural modality, how their brain works best and operates visually, audibly, kinesthetically. It's got long words here. I should have read these through and practiced them. And to give as much of their undivided attention on the text as is possible, to treat it as a study book and not a Mills and Boon novel, ha. Maybe reread more intensely, making notes, underlining and highlighting sections that resonate the most, and going back over those notes and highlighted marks, etc. Anything to get the info going into the grey cells to make that aha connection. Which format is best to absorb the info in, written or audio, or both in your view? Your thoughts, tips and tricks on this might give people better insight, clarity and understanding how best to tackle your work, please. So that's a very good question. I think it very much depends on the individual, but I think you're right. You do need to, because I think it's possible to skim read things and not take them in, definitely. But I also think it's possible to read things, understand it and agree with it all, but to sort of do it in the abstract and not to apply it to your own drinking. And I think that's the key. You do need to be thinking about what you're reading and applying it to your own experiences and your own drinking. I think that is key, because otherwise you're not actually making any indents in your own beliefs about alcohol. Whether audio or written is best is I think a personal thing. So I'm a reader, and it would never dawn on me to listen to an audiobook, or if it did, I have listened to them, I just couldn't really get into them. I'm just a reader. And it never dawned on me to release Alcohol Explained as an audio, but so many people asked for it and I did it in the end. And actually, I think I'd sell more versions of the audio version than Kindle or the paperbacks. So it's obviously very, very useful for people. It doesn't work for everyone, and some people need both, but I'm actually working at the moment with a teacher on a workbook for Alcohol Explained, which is hopefully going to reach out to a few more people. So this is primarily for people for whom they maybe think the approach is good, but they're not just quite getting it, or people who just need a bit more interaction. So that's sort of a work in progress. So that will be released I don't know when, but hopefully fairly soon. So that might be something to interest people as well. It's going to be sort of a A4 size with places to actually write answers in and to get people hopefully to engage in the text a bit more. So it will be set up, or the current intention is it's set up so it will be you read a bit of the text and have a think about the topic ahead. So it's chapter by chapter. You then read the chapter and then you go back to the workbook to work through some questions. And a lot of it is geared to getting people to take the concepts of the book and to put it into their own experiences and to start really forcing them to think, okay, I've read this as a concept. How does that apply to me and my drinking? Can I see these patterns, these ideas in my own drinking? So that will be out soon as well. As I said, I don't know exactly when, but we're sort of working on it at the moment. What are your views on enablers, if there is such a thing? If someone wants a drink, they will. Yeah, I mean, I can kind of see, I mean, certainly from my perspective, if I wanted a drink, I'd have one. It was always nicer if someone suggested it and offered it, because then you sort of felt like it was, I don't know, an easier decision to make. But if it wasn't, I would probably find a way to drink anyway. And also, I kind of think I always say this, but your sobriety needs to be stronger than anyone else. You can't be reliant on other people. So, and it is difficult if you've got a partner that drinks, particularly if your relationship is very much built around drinking with them, to then stop drinking. But you need to make your sobriety bulletproof against people, events, whatever that might be. So yeah, there will be enablers out there, and they'll probably make it easier to make people drink, and they'll probably make it slightly harder for people to stop. But I think the fact of the matter is your sobriety needs to be strong enough to get past that anyway. Someone's another question about fading effect bias is bothering me currently. Rosy memory is starting to creep in, which are obviously not rosy and should be banished out to how to keep doing this. So I think I pretty much covered that off anyway. You seem absolutely certain that you will not drink again. In fact, I heard you say if you were only given a month to live, you wouldn't start again. My question is, did you have this mindset from day one, or was it something that developed over time? I'm 33 days alcohol free and would love to have that determination, but it's not there at the moment. So firstly, well done on 33 days. That's brilliant, because 33 days, you're going through a week cycle. You're going through a working day, you're going through weekends, and you're learning to cope. I didn't have that mindset when I started at all. I stopped, I can't remember how long it was after I stopped that I wrote Alcohol Explained. I had a chunk of the information I had now, which I think is what allowed me to stop. But certainly I continued to learn after I stopped drinking, hence Alcohol Explained and then Alcohol Explained 2. So no, I didn't have that mindset from the off at all. I think partly the mindset comes from information and understanding that can change your beliefs. So you can start to think to yourself, you know what, I don't need alcohol to enjoy myself. I can enjoy a holiday without it. I can enjoy Christmas without it. I can enjoy a night out without it. I can cope with stress, good times and bad times without it. You can understand that on a sort of an academic level from reading and information, all the rest of it. But when you actually quit and go through those things and prove it to yourself, it becomes that much more powerful. So you can understand that, yes, I kind of get that I can go on holiday and enjoy it without drinking, but actually there's no substitute for going on holiday and not drinking and thinking, you know what, I did enjoy that. It was different, but I really enjoyed it not drinking. And when you've done that, it becomes that much easier next time. So experience is a massive thing. So no, it doesn't. And I wouldn't worry about it. Just keep going the way you're doing. If you've got a holiday coming up, like 33 days, I'm assuming, what does that take you to? You kind of stopped mid-December or something. I'm assuming you haven't been on holiday, so that might be a big thing for you. So you can start preparing mentally for it and what you'll do when you go on holiday or whatever, if we ever go on holiday again at this rate. But no, don't worry about it. Just keep going with what you're doing, is absolutely fine. Some people do have that from the off and it's fantastic, but not everyone. So again, don't forget, quitting drinking is about learning to live life and enjoy it, to cope with all the highs and the lows without alcohol. Okay. You can do that by reading books, or by experience actually going through these things. Some people are more booky orientated, and some people are lucky enough that they read the books or other books or whatever, and from day one they're perfectly happy with what they're doing. Others, it's a springboard, but then they limp ahead a bit, not really sure of themselves, and slowly build up confidence. Dawn, who was my first guest on here, who most of you know anyway, she didn't even intend to stop. She just was going to do, I think, a year not drinking and see how it went. And over that year, realised how much better life was. So don't worry about it. Just keep going. It's not a straight up journey. It's ups and downs, but just stick with it. I listened to your live sessions walking back after the Saturday sunrise yoga class. I get so much out of them. Thank you. I never posed a question before, so here we go. I've been on my sober journey now for 5 months. Your support in this community has been one of the foundations. That's brilliant. I never set out to never drink again, although I now realise life is so positively different. I can't imagine wanting to go back to alcohol. Okay, so that very much touches onto the previous question and the points there. So thank you to you and this amazing community for all your support. My question is, or maybe it's more to seek ideas. Recently, I've had a few people ask me questions about my journey, and I've nudged them in the direction of your book and the alcohol experiment. However, I'm struggling more, not less, with close friends and relationships where they just drink so much at every social opportunity, and it can still feel a bit lonely. Do you have any suggestions on how to influence those close to you to consider a more sober journey without appearing forceful or holier than thou? All the advice I've read is say nothing and influence by example. But when those close to you continue to drink to excess around you, are there any ideas you have to maybe encourage others to consider a more sober lifestyle? Thank you. I'm really sorry. I don't have any ideas, because that was going to be my suggestion, is to encourage by example. When people see you out and enjoying yourself without alcohol, they will naturally start to want what you have, because let's forget about this concept of normal drinkers, and we all love to think that there's people out there who have the best of everything, who, you know, can have a few drinks and a laugh, but it's not enough to have a hangover or to ruin their sleep, and it's all perfect. Nobody has that. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. Every alcoholic drink that was ever consumed caused a corresponding feeling of anxiety. Okay, it's not possible for any human being to have an alcoholic drink and it not accelerate their heart rate, which has the knock-on effect of robbing them of energy. And it's physiologically impossible for any human being to have any alcohol and for it to not interfere with their natural sleeping pattern. Okay, so nobody has it perfect, and people know that. They may deny it to you, and they may deny it to themselves, but more and more these days people are realizing that they're not quite getting their money's worth when it comes to alcohol. They think it's this big wonderful thing, and actually it makes them feel like rubbish most of the time. And all for the dubious pleasure of feeling slightly dulled for a few hours every day. So when they see, because the big reason that they always go back to it is, yeah, but I could never properly enjoy myself on a night out without alcohol. And then if they see someone they've been drinking with for years going out and having a good time without drinking, they start to think, well, hang on, if I can go out and enjoy my night without alcohol, why am I spending all this money, energy, and wiping out the next day, pouring this sticky, cancerous drug down my throat? So that's all you can really do. I would say don't underestimate the extent to which you may be planting seeds as well. A lot of people, it won't happen immediately. It will take time. But other than that, there's not an awful lot you can do. You can't make people's decisions for them. Don't forget, at social events, if you're not enjoying it because people are drinking too much, leave. You do not have to stay there. The fact of the matter is that social interaction requires a meeting of minds. Okay, so when you're relaxed and socializing with people, it is a nice feeling. You get endorphins, but you need a meeting of minds. When half or a number of the people in the social occasion are taking a drug which stupefies them and makes them really irritating, that meeting of minds starts to there's a misconnection there. So as the evening draws on, if people are drinking, you will enjoy their company less and less. I don't see that as your fault for not drinking. I see it as a problem with them drinking. But be that as it may, if you're not enjoying the evening, don't hang around too long. There's another question here. What is the best way to rid the toxins out of the body? Very bloated and lethargic and not really eating more sweets. I'd love some diet help to get me over this and feel better physically. This kind of goes back to what I was saying before. When you drink a lot, you will have toxins in you. They're less the things that are making you feel rubbish than the chemical imbalance and the increased heart rate and all the stuff that's going on in your body. It takes time. I think on this, there was quite a string of people saying, have this, have that, have the other. Have it if you want it. It may help, but in my experience, it just takes time for your body to get back to normal. Someone's put here, William Porter also has a book called Diet and Fitness Explained, which I'm presently following. Excellent book. I'm steadily losing a pound a week with this. Excellent. Assume that's weight and not money. So yeah, Diet and Fitness Explained, I think, is down to £1 for January in the UK and Australia on Kindle. So if you are interested in reading that, do so. And if you're in Australia and Kindle now is Australia and the UK, now's the time to buy it. You don't need a Kindle device to read a Kindle book. You can just download the free app. Having said that, diet and fitness is probably something to do aside from sobriety, and very much you do feel better when you're eating properly, but you can't miracle cure your way out of a few years of heavy drinking. It takes time. It doesn't take months and months and months, but you are probably looking about a month or so until, as I went through previously, the alcohol, you get rid of the alcohol, you get your chemical balance back into place, and then of course you catch up a bit on the missed sleep. And diet and fitness won't hurt that, and it will help it to a degree, but the lion's share of it, I'm afraid, just takes time. There's another one here. Fading effect bias is what I'm still struggling with. Tips to manage through this. I've written down why I want to quit and refer to it often. Anything else I can do, or does it just take time to move past it? I have spoken about that a bit. I think writing things down, I think, can be incredibly useful. Hence, obviously, the workbook. Diarising and journaling while you're still drinking, I think, is useful because that gives you something very specific to refer back to. The next one, I'm 9 months alcohol free. Meanwhile, I was hoping that my hypertension would decrease by this time, but it didn't. In until now. Is that normal? I expected it would take some time to see a result, but 9 months should be long enough. 9 months should be long enough. And if it's a problem, you might want to speak to a doctor. You might have already spoken to a doctor. The one thing I would say, you may have a hypertension issue aside from alcohol. Alcohol is only going to make it worse. If you do have a hypertension issue, it's all the more reason not to drink. It's a bit of a horrible mixture, that. So I'm not a doctor and I don't know you, so I would say go and speak to a doctor. But yeah, it should have gone down by now. That's my understanding of it anyway. I know we're asking questions about pain, memory, etc., but mine is definitely eyesight. I've noticed how my eyesight is fading and much quicker when I've been heavily drinker. As little as 4 days alcohol free, and it's not blurry half as much. Perhaps there are some questions for William Porter for tomorrow. Do you know, I'm not sure about eyesight. I'm sure must be something out there. I'll probably have to look into that. If I'm honest, I've never considered it, but that is an interesting one. Yeah, I'll try and have a look into that for next time, I think. The next one, I've fallen so bad and hard Christmas, I found hard. I'm feeling the very worst I could ever be. I'm really drowning and can't find a way on my own. I have no one. It's very hard to give specific advice to a comment like that. But what I would say is this is a classic example of someone who is drinking. It's not pleasant for anyone. So if you're there, 9 months or whatever, 6 months, 3 months, and you've got fading effect bias, this is the comment to read. For you in that situation, the best thing you can do is start analysing your drinking and start understanding. It's all about beliefs with drinking. You may not like it, but you believe you have to have it to cope with life, to enjoy the good times, all the rest of it. You need to start analysing those, thinking about them, and deconstructing them, frankly. It's very hard to give anything specific, but think about what makes you pick up the drink each morning. What is it? Is it going to make you feel better? Well, yeah, it certainly will if you're drinking heavily, but that's only because it's relieving the withdrawal caused by the previous dose. So you need to start doing some work yourself, I think, there. This is the last question. We're nearly an hour. I'm coming up on 100 days. Well done again. Sets alarm bells ringing. Why is it that this time I always start thinking about drinking again? I've done it several times, and for some reason I start to think it makes sense or would be okay to drink again right around this time. I understand fading of effect bias, but it just starts to be urgent again, almost, especially on a Friday afternoon, even weeks of almost no desire. Why? So I've spoken about fading effect bias. I've spoken about ambition, about how basically what you're thinking about drinking is not the reality. The idea and not the reality of drinking is what pulls us in. Okay, you're thinking it would be nice to kick back and have a pleasant drink. The reality isn't that. The reality is in that former comment. I've fallen so bad and hard. Christmas I found hard. I'm feeling very worse I could ever be. That's the reality of drinking. Okay, forget sitting out there and having a glass of wine with your friends and laughing and having fun. That's not real. Okay, that's not what drinking is. So keep that in mind. And also, nobody ever goes back to drinking by thinking, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to drink 3 bottles of spirits every single day until I'm completely insane from it, lose my job and go and live on the streets. So the thing that always drags us in is the possibility of moderating, of being in control of it. And I've just spoken about how, one, it's virtually impossible anyway, and two, even if you can maintain it for short bursts of time, it's not a pleasant lifestyle anyway, because it's a life where you're constantly thinking about drinking and wanting a drink even more than if you'd stopped entirely. So I'm going to call it a day there because it's coming up to the hour. I hope that was useful for everyone. Next week, I've got a guest, so I'm alternating now between me on my own and then having a guest in. So next week is Janie Lee Grace, which should be quite exciting. So I'll do a post again on a Thursday for any questions. If I don't get round to the questions next week, obviously I'll carry them over to the following week when I'm back on my own. So I hope that was interesting for everyone. And I shall see you next week. Have a good weekend.